On May 12, 2026, Bloomberg published something that most people in North America scrolled past without fully grasping what it meant. The headline read, "Canada is acting increasingly like the 28th state of the European Union." Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration, but a factual summary of everything that has been quietly happening between Ottawa and Brussels over the past 12 months, accelerated by one man's tariffs and another man's refusal to bow to them. Donald Trump wanted Canada as the 51st American state. What he got instead was Canada becoming Europe's closest non-European partner in recorded history. Over the next few minutes, you are going to see the full picture of how that happened, why it matters more than almost any story being covered right now, and what the political consequences are going to be. Let's get into it. Before we continue, thanks for tuning in. Your support is what keeps this channel going, and I genuinely appreciate every one of you watching. Make sure you subscribe and hit the like button so more people can see this. Here is what we know. In June 2025, Canada and the European Union announced what they called the new EU-Canada Strategic Partnership of the Future, alongside a security and defense partnership. Those are not routine diplomatic agreements. They cover trade, technology, energy, and security, which is effectively the entire architecture of how two major economies interact. At the time, most Western media treated it as a symbolic gesture in response to Trump's tariffs. It was not symbolic. It was the foundation. The numbers from that period tell you how serious this was, even before the new deals. Since CETA, the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, entered provisional application in 2017, two-way trade in goods had already surged by more than 75%. Services trade between the two grew by 97% over the same period. By 2025, the total value of Canada-EU goods and services trade had reached $178.6 billion. The EU was not Canada's second-largest trading relationship by accident. That relationship had been quietly expanding for nearly a decade, while everyone was focused on what was happening at the US-Canada border. Then came the move that no country outside of Europe had ever made before. On February 14, 2026, at the Munich Security Conference, Canada officially joined the European Union's Security Action for Europe program, known as SAFE. The SAFE instrument is a €150 billion defense procurement fund. Its entire purpose is to allow participating nations to co-purchase military equipment, access low-interest loans for weapons and defense systems, and embed their industrial capacity inside Europe's rearmament effort. Until February 14, 2026, not a single non-European country had ever been permitted to join. Not the United Kingdom, not Australia, not Japan. Canada was the first. What that means in practical terms is this. Canadian defense companies can now bid on European procurement contracts. Canadian ammunition, missiles, drones, and artillery systems can be sold into a market backed by hundreds of billions in European funding. Canada's Defense Minister, Bill Blair, said the opportunities were enormous and would catalyze massive private investment in Canada's defense sector. The EU's own position was unambiguous. The Council of the EU stated formally that the agreement with Canada made it the first non-European country to participate in the defense loan scheme. This was happening at the exact same time Trump was telling the world he had essentially wiped out 75% of Iran's missile capability and that Canada was alive only because America protected it. His exact words were, "Canada lives because of the United States." That was January 2026. 5 weeks later, Canada signed a defense integration agreement with the European Union that had never been offered to any country outside the continent. Stay with me, because the defense integration is only one dimension. The trade layer is where this gets even more consequential. On March 5, 2026, Canada and the EU signed a package of enhancements to CETA in Toronto. EU Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic flew to Canada specifically for the ceremony. The package included a new framework for investment dispute resolution designed to make it easier for small and medium-sized businesses on both sides to access legal arbitration. It included a mutual recognition agreement for architects, which opens Canada's professionals to Europe's $1.1 trillion construction market. And it launched formal negotiations on a Canada-EU digital trade agreement covering data sharing, cybersecurity, AI regulation, and digital services. That last piece matters because more than 40% of the €51 billion services trade between Canada and the EU is already delivered digitally. The two countries are not just trading physical goods. They are building the regulatory framework for how their entire digital economies will interact. When you build a common framework for AI standards, cybersecurity protocols, and data sharing rules with another economic bloc, you are not creating a partnership. You are creating alignment. And alignment, once it reaches a certain depth, is very difficult to reverse. The conservative opposition in Canada tried to frame all of this as a distraction. Pierre Poilievre went on social media to say Carney's talk of a rupture with the United States was reckless, that Canada was throwing away a relationship with the customer that buys 2/3 of its goods. And he was not wrong about the exposure. Approximately 70% of Canadian exports go to the United States. That dependency is real, and it is the central vulnerability that the Carney government is trying to reduce. But here is what Poilievre's framing missed. Carney was not choosing Europe over America. He was choosing to build a parallel track while the American track remained under threat. The USMCA, the Canada-US-Mexico Trade Agreement, is up for mandatory review later this year. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has already signaled that certain tariff rates may rise. The Supreme Court struck down Trump's broadest Liberation Day tariffs, but a 10% baseline remains. And the Trump administration has made clear it views USMCA renegotiation as an opportunity to extract more from Canada, not less. Carney's calculation is straightforward. If the American floor drops, Europe becomes the ceiling. Now let's talk about what happened on May 4th, 2026, because that date is the moment the Bloomberg headline became inevitable. Mark Carney traveled to Yerevan, Armenia, to attend the 8th European Political Community Summit. He was invited by the European leaders who coordinate that forum. He became the first non-European leader in the history of the European political community to attend one of its summits. The EPC was founded in 2022 by French President Emmanuel Macron, specifically as a coordination body for European democracies. For 4 years, it operated as a strictly European forum. Then, in May 2026, it opened its doors to Canada. At the summit, Carney sat across the table from the heads of France, Germany, Poland, Spain, Italy, Ukraine, the European Council, the European Commission, and the European Parliament. He told those assembled leaders that the international order would be rebuilt out of Europe. His framing was deliberate. He did not say the international order would be rebuilt from Washington. He said Europe. The EU's own ambassador to Canada, Genevieve Tuts, appeared on Canadian television the following day and confirmed the direction of travel. She said the EU is looking to elevate its relationship with Canada. That word elevate was chosen carefully. It implies movement. It implies a current level that is already high and a target level that is higher still. And then there is the statement made by Finland's President Alexander Stubb in April 2026, which was widely reported but not widely understood in terms of what it actually signals. Stubb flew to Ottawa for bilateral meetings with Carney. The two men, who exchanged messages almost daily according to Stubb himself, held extensive talks on trade and Arctic defense. During a televised interview, Stubb said, and this is his direct language, Canada, in terms of its whole composure, its value base, is so close to the European Union that the least we can do is to forge a really close strategic partnership. He then added, I can envisage a much larger EU. Whether Canada is a part of it or not is up to Canada to decide. No sitting EU member state president says that casually. Alexander Stubb holds a PhD in international relations from the London School of Economics. He served as Finland's foreign minister and prime minister before becoming president. He knows what it means to say publicly that a North American country should consider joining a European political and economic union. That is not off-script diplomacy. That is a signal. There are no formal membership discussions underway. Canada has not applied to join the EU. The EU's own founding treaties require that a country be geographically European to qualify for membership, and Canada is not. But what Finland's president was describing is not the EU as it currently exists. It is the EU as it could exist if the transatlantic realignment continues, and the steps Canada has taken are not the steps of a country that considers itself permanently outside that framework. Consider the sequence again. A trade partnership already worth $178.6 billion a year. The first non-European country to join a €150 billion European defense fund. CETA enhanced and digital trade negotiations launched. The first non-European leader to attend an EPC summit. A sitting Finnish president publicly floating Canadian EU membership. And Bloomberg, one of the most closely read financial publications on Earth, running the headline on May 12, 2026, that Canada is acting like the 28th state. Now, here is the dimension that is not being discussed in most of the coverage. The EU currently has 27 member states. The United Kingdom, which left the bloc through Brexit in 2020, was essentially the 28th. The specific number Bloomberg chose, 28th state, is not accidental. It is a direct reference to what the EU lost when Britain left. And it is a direct suggestion that Canada may be filling that structural vacuum. The EU needs a large, English-speaking, resource-rich, technologically advanced democratic partner with defense capacity and global standing. Canada has all of those things. And after Brexit, the bloc no longer has any member that combines all of them. This is the part that connects directly to Trump, because his strategy has produced the opposite of what it was designed to accomplish. Trump's stated goal was to pull Canada closer to the United States economically and politically by pressuring it into integration. His tool was economic coercion, tariffs, sovereignty threats, the 51st state rhetoric, and the constant suggestion that Canada was somehow a freeloader dependent on American generosity. What he accomplished instead was pushing Canada toward a set of relationships that do not require American participation at all. Canada has now hit NATO's 2% defense spending target, an achievement Carney's office announced in March 2026, calling it the largest year-over-year increase in Canadian defense spending in generations. Canada spent more than $63 billion in under a year to hit that target. It is on a stated path to 3.5% of GDP on core defense and an additional 1.5% on defense-related investment by 2035. And a substantial portion of that spending is now integrated into European procurement frameworks, not American ones. Trump called Canada's new prime minister the equivalent of a lightweight when discussing Iran. He called the Canadian government ungrateful. He said Canada lives because of the United States. And while he was saying all of those things, Canada was signing defense agreements with 27 European nations, being invited to sit at tables that no non-European country had ever sat at, and building the legal and economic infrastructure for a relationship that, if it continues on its current trajectory, will eventually require its own category. Not an alliance, not a partnership, but something closer to integration. The Bloomberg headline is not a prediction. It is a description of what has already happened. Canada did not become the EU's 28th state in a legal sense, but in terms of trade law, defense procurement, digital regulation, professional qualification recognition, strategic summit participation, and rhetorical alignment with European positions on the global order, Canada has moved closer to Brussels in 12 months than most EU applicant countries have moved in a decade of formal membership negotiations. That gap between the legal reality and the functional reality is exactly where the next phase of this story lives. What comes next is the USMCA renegotiation, which the Trump administration has already signaled will be more confrontational than any previous iteration. It is the EU's multi-year fiscal framework negotiations, where Canadian defense contractors are specifically eyeing a larger share of joint procurement contracts. It is the completion of the Digital Trade Agreement, which will create a common regulatory space for AI and cybersecurity that spans the Atlantic in a way that excludes the United States. And it is the next European Political Community Summit, where the question of Canada's participation is no longer whether it will be invited, but how permanent that invitation becomes. Two governments are building something in public that neither is formally announcing, and the man who is supposed to make Canada the 51st American state spent the last 12 months watching it becomes something that nobody in Washington fully has a framework for yet. That is not a story the mainstream political press has assembled in one place. It is the story that matters. Share this with anyone following what is actually happening to the global order right now. If this kind of coverage is what you come here for, subscribe and like the video so more people can find it. I will see you on the next one.